Picture this. A single, highly confidential diplomatic cable contains a message so explosive that it completely upends an entire nation's political landscape. All will be forgiven in Washington. Just let that ultimatum sink in for a second. That alleged quote is at the very heart of one of the most intense political controversies in recent history. Today, we're going to unpack the source material surrounding this massive moment that literally shook Pakistan. We're going to trace the timeline chronologically, and we'll analyze exactly what happened when global geopolitics collided head-on with domestic power struggles.
Welcome! I'm so excited to guide you through this explainer today. We are diving deep into the heavily debated Diplomatic Cipher, an issue that was actually recently brought back into the global spotlight by the media outlet Dropsite News. By looking directly at the timeline and the vastly different interpretations of these leaked events, we're going to understand exactly how a single coded message became the epicenter of a political earthquake. So here's our roadmap. First, tensions build in 2021. 2, the Moscow visit. 3, the fateful March meeting. 4, the no confidence vote. And finally 5, diverging stances and fallout.
All right, part 1, tensions build, summer of 2021.
You know, the diplomatic slights and protocol clashes actually started piling up way before the crisis truly hit. For instance, despite Pakistan's pivotal role in brokering the Doha Agreement for the U.S. exit from Afghanistan, incoming U.S. President Joe Biden surprisingly skipped the customary phone call to Prime Minister Imran Khan. That exact same month, in June 2021, the CIA director visited Pakistan and wanted a direct meeting with the Prime Minister. Well, Khan's office refused, citing protocol, basically arguing a head of state shouldn't be holding a direct, informal meeting with an agency director. Then, just a couple of months later in August, the incredibly chaotic fall of Kabul to the Taliban drastically complicated the entire region's dynamics, and that just added an immense layer of pressure to an already strained U.S.-Pakistan relationship.
And the friction hit a very public peak during a high-profile interview. When he was asked if Pakistan would host U.S. bases for counterterrorism operations in Afghanistan, Prime Minister Khan famously and emphatically replied, "Absolutely not." That blunt, highly public refusal became a major sticking point with American officials, and it really set a distinctly defiant tone for his administration's foreign policy moving forward.
Which brings us to part 2, the Moscow visit in February 2022. Now, this is where domestic planning tragically collides with global history. Prime Minister Khan arrived in Moscow on February 23rd. It was a bilateral trip heavily focused on economic cooperation, and it had actually been planned for years by the Foreign Office. But the very next day, February 24th, President Putin launched the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Khan had literally just been photographed shaking hands with Putin hours before the invasion began. Talk about bad timing, right? The visual optics were an absolute nightmare for Pakistan's relations with the West. And immediately after, as Pakistan abstained from UN votes condemning the invasion, the US made no secret of its severe displeasure over what it called Pakistan's aggressive neutrality.
Okay, moving to part 3, the fateful March meeting.
Real quick before we dissect that critical meeting, what exactly is a cipher?
Basically, it's a highly classified coded diplomatic cable. It's the secure encrypted way an embassy reports highly sensitive, behind closed doors conversations back to its home capital. It is a closely guarded state secret, meant only for the absolute highest levels of government.
So, the specific cipher in question originated from a lunch meeting on March 7, 2022, between U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Donald Lu and Pakistani Ambassador Asad Majid Khan. The main topic on the table was Pakistan's stance on Ukraine. Now, a really crucial detail to remember here is that the U.S. side viewed Khan's highly controversial trip to Russia not as a unified state consensus, but entirely as the Prime Minister's isolated personal decision.
Let's walk through how that conversation actually escalated step by step. First, Donald Lu aggressively critiques Pakistan's neutrality. Then comes the absolute bombshell. Lu issues a stark warning. He says if a vote of no confidence against Prime Minister Khan succeeds, Washington will forgive Pakistan. If it fails, Lu warns of severe diplomatic isolation for Khan and incredibly tough times ahead for the country. In response to this, Ambassador Majid forcefully defends the Russia trip. He explains it wasn't some solo rogue move, but a pre-planned interagency consensus. Finally, shifting from defense to offense, Majid points out that the U.S. has actually been ignoring Pakistan's own diplomatic outreach. The ambassador ended up concluding his coded cable by noting that Lu's harsh language likely had approval from the highest levels of the White House.
That leads us right into part 4, the vote of no confidence.
The timeline here is just striking. The Washington meeting happens on March 7th. Literally the very next day, on March 8th, the Pakistani opposition formally files a no-confidence motion against Khan's government. That rapid 24-hour turnaround became the absolute foundation for the political explosion that followed. Jump to March 27th, and Khan is at a massive public rally in Islamabad, waving what he calls a threat letter. And barely 2 weeks after that, on April 9th, he is officially ousted from power by a parliamentary vote. Let's look closer at that massive March 27th rally because it completely changed the narrative. Khan dramatically pulls a piece of paper from his pocket and declares to the roaring crowd, "I am not making allegations. I have this letter. It is proof. Are we slaves?" He framed the document not just as standard diplomatic friction, but as a direct, aggressive threat to the sovereignty of the nation. He was essentially demanding to know if the country's leaders were expected to merely take orders from foreign powers.
Finally, Part 5: Diverging Stances and Fallout. And now we hit the core analytical focus of this whole explainer: the deep divergence in how this document was interpreted by the key players. On one side, you have Imran Khan's steadfast claims. He argued the cipher was absolute proof of a coordinated foreign conspiracy to remove him, a direct threat to Pakistan's sovereignty, and that local political and institutional actors were actively compromised by this external pressure. Versus, on the flip side, you have the official stance of the military establishment and the incoming government. They maintained there was absolutely no grand conspiracy. They categorized the language in the cipher as perhaps undiplomatic, sure, but ultimately just routine, non-threatening diplomatic posturing. Furthermore, the military strongly emphasized its strict neutrality, stating clearly that they had no involvement whatsoever in the parliamentary vote that ousted Khan. You know, there is a fascinating irony in how the physical document itself was treated over time. Before Khan's ouster, his political opponents dismissed it entirely. They called it a fake paper or just manufactured political drama, deployed purely so he could survive the looming vote. But the moment the new government took charge, that exact same piece of paper was suddenly treated as a highly classified, deeply sensitive state secret. In fact, acknowledging its very real existence actually became the basis for severe legal action against Khan.
Which brings us to a really important number: 10. The fallout from this wasn't just political, it was intensely legal. For allegedly mishandling this exact secret and utilizing it for political gain, Imran Khan and his foreign minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi were initially handed 10-year prison sentences under the Official Secrets Act. Just think about that for a second. A decade in prison over a diplomatic cable. Now, while these massive sentences, which were delivered in a highly controversial trial, were later suspended by the High Court, they perfectly illustrate just how radioactive this single coded message became.
So we've walked through the timeline, the leaked text, and the entirely opposite narratives. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought to chew on. What does the leaked cipher ultimately reveal about the delicate balance of sovereignty, foreign policy, and internal power struggles? When a single coded message has the power to trigger a national crisis, it really forces us to rethink how geopolitical influence truly operates behind closed doors. Thanks for joining me on this explainer today. Stay curious.